When you're a speech-language pathologist with a caseload of 70 or more kids, group therapy is a necessary evil. Sometimes it feels like group speech-language therapy only happens because we don't have enough time to see each child individually. But there are actually a lot of really great benefits to group therapy as well. Our students are much more likely to work on those hard skills when they see other students working on hard things as well. And hearing those errors in other people's speech can sometimes improve their awareness of their own speech. Plus, we get a ton of practice working on those interpersonal skills that everybody needs to work on. But running a speech language group can also be very daunting. I'm speech language pathologist Carrie Clark, and on today's episode of the Speech and Language Kids podcast, I'm going to show you some quick and easy ways to run your speech language therapy groups with no prep time at all. So, welcome to the podcast. If you are live with me inside the hub, welcome to you as well. Hey, Karen. We are going to get right into some really awesome group strategies. I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways that I like to run my groups, as well as an alternative to groups if you're still feeling stressed out over your group therapy sessions. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that we have a very fun challenge that we are doing next month, which is why we are talking about these group sessions now. So during the month of December 2024, if you're listening to this in the future, we are going to do a no prep challenge because I know that all of you have no time around the holidays anyway. So being able to spend an entire month just doing the therapy and not having to do any of the planning, the prepping, all of that extra stuff that goes with it, that is the goal of our No Prep December challenge. So today we're going to be tackling groups, but we have already tackled data collection and getting yourself set up with speech folders so that you can do a full month of therapy without any planning or prep. So if you missed any of that, either go back on the podcast to the previous episodes or go ahead and go into the hub at hub.speechandlanguagekids.com. You'll find our webinar, you'll find our videos, you'll find all of the printouts that you can use to make this happen. So that is what we are talking about today. If you are listening to this podcast on the audio version, you can find the show notes at speechandlanguagekids.com/group-therapy. That's where you're going to find all of these notes of everything I'm going to talk about today, along with all the links to download the actual stuff that goes with it. So that's where you'll find that. Okay, so you all know me. You know I love a good story. So I'm going to start this episode by talking about Cub Scouts. So my own kids have been in Cub Scouts for several years now, and my youngest, I was going with him to the meetings. And for any of you who know my kids, they're kind of a hot mess. Let's be honest. So are we all, I guess. But it was a lot to keep him managed at our meetings. And I was kind of hands-on trying to just get him through those activities because I knew he wanted to do the big fun stuff, but you got to do the work too to get there. And so it was always a struggle. And I guess about a year ago, the leader of his particular den, that's what they call their little groups in Cub Scouts, she had to move away unexpectedly, and we were left without leadership for his den. And I really struggled with the decision on whether or not I should step up because I wasn't sure if I could manage him and lead a group at the same time. And I talked to my husband a lot about it, and we discussed it, and I finally decided to go for it. And I was so nervous that I wasn't going to be able to manage this group. Now, we had another parent who stepped up too, and so we ended up being able to split the group. So we each had 5 kids instead of a full 10 second graders, which is way better. But I'm sure many of you have run a group of 5 second graders before, and you know the chaos that ensues, right? So I buckled down and I got my SLP hat on and I was like, I can do this. I can do groups. And what I found was that because I had the experience as an SLP doing these groups in schools, I already had the skills. And I way overplanned for my first one. I was so nervous. But then once I started to get the hang of it, I was like, oh, I get it. I understand how to run this. Just like I understand how to run my speech therapy groups. It wasn't that different. So the first activity, I think it was they had to do paper airplanes. We were talking about how things move on air. And so I, very no prep style, I overplanned in my head and I wrote it all down. But all I did was bring some paper and a tape measure. And we were able to practice folding airplanes, test throw them, measure how far they went, decide which styles did better, and keep tweaking. And so as I started to plan these den meetings, I started to see that I could use these same no prep methods to do those. And then my next meeting, I think, went even better because it was a fitness one. So they were learning about different stretches and different exercises and different ways to move their body. And so we set up stations. And this one we did actually have all 10 kids together. And we set up little stations around the room, and each one just had a very simple exercise or workout on it, and we put them on paper, and we just had the kids do circuits. They went around the circle, and each did a little activity, and then the leaders were able to just kind of pop over and help kids as needed. And so a little foreshadowing here, that's what we're going to be talking about today, but how do we do this for our speech therapy groups, and how do we make it no prep? Because that's what we're talking about for December, is going a full month without planning and prepping elaborate activities, because I want you to see this doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple. So I'm going to help you simplify these group sessions down so that you don't feel like you have to take this home on the weekends and work on your plan. You can just walk into the session and feel confident that you know how to do this. Okay, so let's start with how do we get set up with this. And I'm going to kind of breeze through this piece because this is what we've been talking about on the last couple of episodes of the podcast. And this is your planning and your prepping for a full month. So I'm not saying I want you to wing the entire month and never even think about what you're doing, but I'm saying if you spend a little bit of time right now at the end of November, or whichever month you're in right now, getting ready, then you can go for a full month without planning and prepping, okay? So first step is to plan 1 to 3 skills that you're going to target for each student for the month. And so we have a monthly planning page. You can download that right inside the hub, and you can use that to just say, okay, I'm going to focus down. I'm going to focus on one skill for this student that they really need to work on this month that I want them to make progress on. Maybe 2 skills. Every once in a while, I'll let you get away with 3. But most of the time, our students do better if we really focus in on one thing or maybe 2. And so try to keep it as narrow as you can. But you're going to just pick the skill, and then you're going to grab a no prep therapy material and drop it in their folder. Now, we did a whole episode on setting up your speech folders, so you can go back and listen to that. And if you need the no prep therapy materials, we have that inside the hub as well. That's our big claim to fame. That's what we've got, is a whole bunch of no prep therapy kits. So you just grab that, or if you don't have a kit, you can just grab some flashcards or something that's going to help them practice their skill and throw it in the folder. Now, I'm not talking about a big elaborate activity that is, going to have them creating snowflakes with their sounds. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying just something that you can say, okay, look at these pictures. Now let's practice this skill, okay? So you drop those in the folders. And then in your therapy space, you're going to have a selection of general activities. So things like games or crafts or toys or outside gear like balls or frisbees. Okay, so you're going to have just these general activities, whatever's appropriate for the age that you're working with and the developmental level that you're working with. And those are going to be in your therapy space, and they're just going to stay there. You're not going to do anything with them. They're just going to be available. So that's all you have to do to set up. Pick the skills, drop them in their speech folders, and have some general stuff ready to go. All right? Hey guys, I see there's so many of you inside the hub listening. Thank you guys for popping in. If you guys have any questions as we go along, since you're here with me live, you can hop into the chat and ask those questions, and we'll be able to address those as we go along. And for those of you listening, if you want to participate in our live recordings, you can go over to hub.speechandlanguagekids.com. I am trying to plan it so that I record episodes on Mondays and then they come out the following Monday. And anyone with a freebie membership or any of the levels can come in and listen. So I'd love to see you guys in there. Okay, so we've talked about how to get set up. Let's talk about how we actually run the group therapy then. So here's the dream. Here's the ideal of what we want it to look like. Obviously, it's not always going to, but here is one way this could go. So I have my speech folders in a file box right by the door. So the students come in, They rummage through and they find their folder. They grab their folder and they take it to the table. They open up their folder, and right inside there is the material that they're working on. If you're using our No Prep therapy kits, our therapy kits are broken down by phase of therapy. And so the easiest version of the skill is on top, right? And so they work on that. And then once they're consistent with that, you just tear that page off and send it home as homework so they can reinforce it at home while you're working on the next phase. So whatever's on top, that's all you want them to practice when they come in. And they're doing a little bit of independent practice, reminding themselves what the skill is. And as they're doing that, you're going around and just giving feedback, adding a little support where needed, and helping them remember how to do that skill, okay? Then, once everybody starts getting squirrely, and that's the official term for when it's time to move on, everybody's getting squirrely, they're not practicing anymore, then you say, okay, we're gonna do our group activity now. I need you guys to decide as a team what we're going to do today. And they get to pick from the games that are on the shelf or the crafts or the toys or whatever it is. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that will never work. There is no way that they're going to be able to decide together on an activity. And here's what I say to that. What a great thing for us to practice in therapy, right? Because yes, you're right. They're going to disagree on what we should do. And you know what they're going to do throughout the rest of their day? Disagree with their peers. So if we can spend a little bit of our time working on navigating those disagreements, then not only is it going to make our sessions easier in the future, but it's also going to help them learn a life skill that every single one of them needs to practice. So here's my navigating disagreements plan. So here's what I do. So I say, okay, I see that we're having a disagreement. We're all going to go around and say what we want, okay? And so you just say an I statement, not you did this. I want to play this game. I want to play this game. And we go around the circle and everybody has to listen. And then I say, okay, I hear that these students want to play this game and these students want to play this game. Does anyone have any potential solutions? And here's the part that as a parent, this one's hard for me because I want to start jumping in with solutions. Well, why don't we take turns? Well, you picked last time, so why don't you let him pick? That's not the point here. The point is for them to learn the skills. So we just say, does anyone have any potential solutions? And the first time you do this, it's going to be really hard, maybe the first several times. But as the group gets better at this, they will start to come up with their own solutions like, well, how about you pick this time and I'll pick next time? Or how about we play your game for half of the time and then my game for half of the time? And sometimes they come up with really weird solutions that you never would have even suggested, but everyone agrees to it. So at that point, your job is just facilitating the conversation. Okay, this person suggested this one. Does anyone have any other suggestions? All right, we've got these options on the table. Does anyone do we agree on one of these, or is there one that we could meet halfway on? And you just let them come to that decision naturally, and then, okay, that's what we're going to do, and then we move forward. And then the rest of the session is doing whatever that was, that game, that craft, that activity, but each person is working on their skill, whatever it was that was in their folder, on their turn, or maybe you're working with this student while this student's taking their turn, or if it's something like a craft where everybody can just be doing it while they're practicing their speech and their language, we do that too. You just kind of let it free flow. This is child-led therapy, but we're looking for opportunities to practice those skills, even if we have to kind of force it and say, okay, now I need you to say your word 5 times. Now I need you to say your word 5 times. So we can kind of support them through that. But that's the idea of, okay, we're doing one activity, and we're all working on our different skills. Okay, so that's one approach to group therapy. Hey guys, inside the hub, do you have any questions on that or any thoughts? You can type those into the chat. But then I want to talk about 2 other ideas too. So the first one is the stations approach, which is kind of like what I was talking about with my cubs, my den that I do. And then the second one is the 5-minute therapy approach. So if you haven't heard me talk about that yet, get ready, it's coming. Okay, so the stations approach. This is slightly different. So instead of us all working together on one activity, everyone's doing a little bit more independent work. So before the students come in, you're going to go around and you're going to grab some stuff off of your shelf and you're going to set them in specific areas around the room. So let's say you have a group of 4 kids, you're going to grab 4 things off your shelf and you're going to set them down. This might take a little bit of thinking up front to say, okay, what kinds of stations would be appropriate for my students? And maybe you just have a couple of different station caddies or cups or boxes or something that you can just grab 4 of them before your session. So yes, maybe this takes a little prep work up front, but then you can reuse the stations anytime you have a group, okay? And I'll give you some examples here in a sec. So for the stations approach, the students are still going to come in and grab their folder, but then instead of sitting down at the table as a group, they're going to go to a station, okay? And this will take some training, but you'll get there. They're going to grab their folder, pick a station. So everyone's sitting somewhere in the room, and then you're going to start the timer, and everyone's going to practice their skill independently at their station. And then one of the stations is you. You are the speech therapist station or whatever your title is. And so with the student you're working on, you're trying to get them to the next level of that skill. You're trying to push them farther. You're trying to get them perfected. You're giving them all that independent feedback, okay? The kids that are at the other stations are working independently, and so they should be working at a level that they're comfortable with. So for example, if you have a student who's really good at S in isolation, but they're still struggling to get it into words, then when they're at the independent stations, they're working on it in isolation. But when they get to you, you're working on it in words. And that, even though they're not working on it in words at the independent stations, they're still reinforcing that brain pathway of this is how I make S, this is how I make S, this is how I make S. And that's what we need, right? We need that practice, the positive practice, so that they can be successful at the next level. Okay? Let's see. What did I miss there? Oh, yeah. So then after a set amount of time, they rotate. And everybody gets a turn at your station and with the other stations as well. So here are some ideas for some stations. So obviously the first station is you. Another idea would be a fine motor station. So stacking blocks or stacking up Legos. And you need to give them specific instructions such as, okay, for every block you put on, you have to say your word or you have to practice a sentence or you're, making your S sound, whatever their skill is. They have to understand this is work time. We're giving you something to do with your hands to make it more fun, but it's still work time. You have to work. And you might have to provide those reminders as you're looking around the room. So fine motor would be one. Gross motor. So for this, I like to have a cup full of popsicle sticks, and I just write a gross motor activity on each popsicle stick. They draw out a stick, and they do that movement while they're practicing their word, their sentence, whatever it is. So maybe one says stand on one foot, or jump up and down, or touch your toes. Okay, so that would be a gross motor. Similarly, I like to do a yoga station. I have some yoga cards. I don't have them with me, otherwise I would show you. They're the yoga pretzel ones. Those are the ones I like. But it's just a picture of a yoga pose. So I'll have them pull one out and try to hold that yoga pose while they say their words 10 times or make their sound or whatever it is. You could also have a writing or a tracing station. I like to use dry erase boards for this, or you could print out a page with different shapes of lines and have that laminated so they can trace a line if they're not writing yet, but just having them write their words or write their sentences or something like that. And then another idea would be a sensory station. So this would be some sort of tactile material, a putty, a slime, a sensory bin, a box of dried beans, just something that they can move their hands through and play with while they're practicing their sounds. Because we know that when practice is tied to movements, we activate more parts of the brain and it makes us more likely to remember it, okay? So those are some ideas for stations. Okay, no questions? You guys are so quiet today. Pop any questions in the chat if you guys have them. Okay, so then the third approach to groups that I'm going to give you is called the 5-minute approach, and it's actually not groups at all. So if those groups are still stressing you out, if they are still not feeling very effective, I encourage you to consider the 5-minute session instead. So for this approach, instead of seeing a group, let's say instead of seeing your group of 4 kids for 30 minutes, you're going to see each of them individually for 5 minutes. Okay? And so yes, this is going to require you to change your IEP minutes, and I'll explain that in a sec, but just go with me on this brain journey for a minute. So you're going to, the way I do this is I walk myself to their classroom. I say, hey, can I grab Johnny for 5? And we've already worked this out. Johnny comes out and we just stand or sit right outside their doorway. We're not going all the way back to the speech room and all the way back down again because that'll take forever. We just find a quiet place right out in the hallway and I say, okay, 5 minutes of speech. Let's go. We're going to practice these words. And I like to use the Articulation Station app for my speech words, or I have on my iPad, I have a photo album full of pictures of different sets of pictures that I've grabbed online, usually things like kids doing different actions, and we use those to practice grammatical skills or conversational skills or sentence level, whatever we need to do. But so I just have these things up on my iPad and I am just flipping through, okay? So I set a 5-minute timer and I say, okay, boom, 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 this one, this one, this one. And we are cramming in as many reps as we can. And here's the thing. When you're only doing 5 minutes of therapy, you don't need a game. You don't need an activity. You don't rarely even need to use any behavior strategies because it's so fast. When we're just moving them through, we get it done, and then they pop back into class. Usually around minute 3 or 4, I start to lose them a little bit. And most of the time, all I have to do is pop over to the timer and go, oh, look, only a minute left. Let's see how many more we can get done. And that's enough. If not, if I have an extra squirrely kid, then I say, okay, the next 10 we're going to do while standing on one foot. And then we do 10 more. And then I say, okay, now plank. And we get into a plank position and we do 10 more. And then by the time we've done a couple of those antics, we're through our 5 minutes. So that's it. You're just seeing how many repetitions you can get in 5 minutes. And I have done this numerous times with numerous kids where I have actually used a sports clicker to count how many we've done. And I can get more repetitions in 5 minutes individual than I can in a 30-minute group. Almost all the time. And it's like by a lot. So this is a really great strategy. And the thing I love about this strategy is that the kids make faster progress. The research shows it. My experience with kids shows it. They make such fast progress when we're doing this. Now, obviously, it has to be a skill that you can drill like that. Working on initiating interactions, you can't really drill initiating interactions for 5 minutes. That doesn't really make sense. So it has to be something that lends itself well to this style. But for those ones like speech and grammar and all of those things, it's really effective. Okay, so let's talk about the minutes because I get asked that question a lot. You will have to change IEP minutes. You have to reflect that you're lowering minutes. I like to write mine by the month because it gives me some flexibility as to when I grab them for those 5-minute sessions. And so the research recommends somewhere between 2 to 5 5-minute sessions per week based on the severity. So a milder kid would get 2, a severe kid, you'd see them once a day, so 5 in a week, or somewhere in between. And so then I write mine per month. So I might say 5 minutes, 7 times monthly. And that's how I'll write it in the IEP. And I'll explain to the parents, to the teachers, to the admin, I'll say, okay, there's this approach. It's working really well with a lot of kids. I think this approach would work really well for this student because, fill in the blank, here's the research, show them the research, and then say, this means they're going to miss less class time. Because a lot of times our students who are working on these speech sounds, they also need to be in that reading and writing instruction to practice it there too. And so when we're pulling them out for all of these group sessions, they're missing more class time. So we say, we're going to try this, we're going to give it a go, and if they're not making the progress I want to see, then we'll immediately switch back to those 30-minute sessions, no big deal, but I think this is worth trying, and you give it a go. All right? So that is the 5-minute approach. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there because I am trying to keep our podcast to 30 minutes, and we're about 24. So that is the big picture, but I have so many more resources for you. You can go, if you're listening to this audio, you can go to speechandlanguagekids.com/group-therapy, and that's going to take you to the show notes. You'll see all of this information. You don't have to write it down as you're listening. All of the show notes are there, along with the links to the individual resources if you're saying, hey, I like this, but I want to learn more, or if you need the actual stuff like the planning pages and the information for the therapy folders and all of that. So all those links are there. You can also find all of this inside the hub. So those of you who are in there with me in the hub right now, there is that whole section called The Way. The Way is my system of how I do speech therapy, and you'll find all the resources in there as well. All right, Jocelyn says, wonderful. Thank you, Jocelyn. I'm so glad you all could join me with me live today. And thank you to everyone who is listening on one of the podcast networks. I think we're pushed out to almost all of them now. But if there's somewhere where you want to hear us and we're not there, let us know. But yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys over on the Speech and Language Kids website and inside the hub. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I love getting to actually chat with people because as you can see, I'm in an empty room right now, just hanging out in my office, and it's nice to get to actually connect with you guys. So please reach out, say hi, ask for help. That's what I'm here for. And we'll see you next week. I think we're going to talk about some no prep ideas for language therapy. So we'll be hitting that as well. I love the dinosaur in the back. Yeah, you like that, Emily? This is our gym / my kids' playroom. That's what this room is. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.